Almost. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Wake Up Happy Sis. I'm your host, self-care strategist, Leanne Dulce. I've got my wonderful guests here today, Shauna, Jeannine, and Adriane, and we're going to be talking about self-esteem and setting healthy boundaries. That is going to look, when I tell y'all I'm so ready for this topic, this is one of my favorite topics. And we were talking just a little bit backstage about just the importance and how hard it is sometimes to set those healthy boundaries because we have that lack of self-esteem. But before I get ahead of myself and jump in, I want to give my beautiful guests the opportunity to introduce themselves. So we're just going to go round robin, Shauna, Jeannine, and then Adriane. Go ahead and tell the audience who you are and what you do.
So I'm Shauna. So I'm a leadership coach, but I'm a certified executive coach, and I work with middle managers, so primarily managers and directors, to help them with becoming more confident in their leadership. I start off with just focusing on their self awareness, then move into kind of how they can build more of a cohesive team, because a lot of what the breakdown happens is usually because they don't know how to delegate or to build a good workforce that has a capability to deliver. And then we move into how can you perform a bit better. So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell.
Awesome. Jeannine.
Hi, I'm Jeannine Brown. I am the founder and CEO of Everyday Lead. We are a global consultancy. I'm based in Atlanta, and we help clients retain talent from intern to retirement who love their careers and the companies they work for. And we do that through professional development training and executive coaching and helping companies design retention strategies. And one of those strategies is creating healthy boundaries. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Leanne, so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. And my favorite is Adriane.
Hey there. I am super excited to be here. Thank you again, Leanne, for inviting me to have this discussion today. Happy to talk about empowering and self-esteem. I'm Adriane Simpson, CEO and founder of the LinkedIn Pros, and I'm a LinkedIn strategist and transition coach for entrepreneurs and professionals who want to transition to more revenue and more income. I also partner with corporations to help them deal with employee engagement and retention by providing training for their employees. So happy to be here.
Yeah.
So look, y'all could see that this is a powerhouse little panel I have set up here, and I don't come to play when I bring guests on to talk to y'all. Okay, we are here, and let me just say, ladies, we get raw and real on here. If you need to toss out one or two little cuss words, because sometimes it's a part of the expression, right? It makes my lips feel a little bit spicy and tingly sometimes. I may toss one out, but we tell it raw, we keep it real and honest and open here. It's not about hurting people's feelings, but sometimes we gotta step on some toes to get the message across and to help people have their transformation. So I want to start today by talking about some of the benefits and the importance of cultivating self-esteem in Black women. So anybody can just jump in if you want to touch on that topic. Feel free.
I'll start. Only because as you were talking, it's top of mind for me as I work with not only the Black women, right, the employees, as well as the companies that hire them, the leadership companies that look for this talent. And I've got a friend in my network who's an executive recruiter, and she said, Adriane, I look on LinkedIn for talent, but I don't post jobs, right? So she's searching and sourcing for people that fit a specific criteria. But what struck me is just insane. She said, once you get into the interview, like Black women don't negotiate. She said, typically she finds that they're so happy just to have the interview, so happy to have the experience, the opportunity, that we don't negotiate. And that is a challenge. That's a sticking point because, sis, if you're there, you deserve everything that comes with it. You deserve to negotiate. You deserve to have the best parts of the entire experience. But that comes with a lack of self-esteem. Even if we're qualified to be in those spaces, we don't often negotiate for what's ours.
Now, when I was still in corporate America, I will say I was definitely not one that knew that I could negotiate, right? And part of that was a confidence in myself, but part of that was just not knowing the ins and outs of owning and understanding your worth, right? And what you actually bring to that company. Most times when we're interviewing, all they're telling us is, make sure you have a couple of questions to ask the company because that seems like you're engaged, blah, 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 right? So coming into the workforce, I didn't know that I should be paid or compensated at a certain level for my knowledge and my understanding. We do come in, and I totally feel that is we do come in and feel like, I'm just going to take whatever they offer me because it's better than the nothing that I have.
Yeah. And then sometimes you might be making a huge leap in compensation. I know when I first moved to Atlanta from Alabama, so after graduation, I started my career in Alabama. And you would have thought I was making a lot of money because I was working for a state agency. And so I think the perception was that, oh, she's probably making a lot of money. She graduated top of her class. But when I ended up getting recruited to come to Atlanta, the pay increase between where I was and what I was getting was significant. It was almost like $45,000.
Oh,
But
wow.
after settling into that job and talking to other people who did that work that were older than me but knew me from my days in Alabama, they were corporate tax directors, and that's the role that I was in. And I told them how much I was making. They was like, "Oh no, you better go in there." And I did negotiate my comp because I was like, "Oh, this is huge." And it was still good for the cost of living in Atlanta, but not for the brevity of work that I was the gravity, of work that I was responsible for. So sometimes you don't know your own worth and your own value.
So
Yeah.
I teach something called value-based interviewing to my clients, because not only do you have to know your value and worth, you should also know the value of the industry, of the job that you're applying to. You should do that research, right? The funniest and saddest story, my personal story, is when I really first started working in corporate America. I got a referral, had the interview, and did well on the interview. I had a great time. The vice president and I were just chopping it up, having a ball. And so we got to the point where he asked me what I wanted to make. I hadn't done any prior research. And so I really just threw out a number that I thought was okay. And I was like, what about, fill in the blank? And he said, why do you think you deserve to make that much? And I gave a list of bullet points. I'm this and I'm awesome and I could do this. Da, 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 da. He said, okay, you're hired. I was so ecstatic. I was super, super happy. But I left there, started the job, enjoyed it. And then one day, about 6 months later, I was speaking to some coworkers who did the same role that I did, sat on the same row as me. And we were talking, they were griping and they were upset about their salary because they felt like they needed to make more. And y'all, they were making $15,000 more than I was.
Oh, wow.
Same job, same role, all these things. Yeah. But I couldn't be, and I was upset, but I could only be upset at myself though. Yeah. Because it was my fault and my responsibility. And so we have to take that. But I was confident, but didn't know my worth. So those things have to go hand in hand as well.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, my experience with it, and I'll share my experience working with others, but also my personal sorry. And when it came down to just the self-esteem portion, it's the relationship with money. Because I find people are always stuck in that space of, am I able to make this money? Or what my mom said or my parents said, you should be humble or you shouldn't ask for this, or growing up we didn't have this. So I appreciate this. And I always find that it starts there. And I remember one particular client, she broke down in tears because she said, I can't ask for that. And I said, what do you mean you can't ask for that? And she's like, I can't ask for that. I don't care what's on the paper. I can't ask for that. And she refused to go into the room to ask for that. And I said, okay, so what is it costing you for not asking for that amount right now? And she's like, well, I can't ask for that. So I said, okay, so why don't you not ask for it and ask the question, how much are they willing to pay you? Because for her, the conversation is, well, that's too much money. They're never going to pay me that kind of money. There's too much money. She broke down in tears, said she refused to ask for that because that's too much money. It turns out that was HR's budget. They knew what the market was. They knew what they would have to give her, but she refused to ask for that. When we talked a bit more, she had more ties to money about not asking for money because dad took care of the money, mom didn't take care of the money. She had no real relationship with money, and she
Mhm.
kind of just existed as long as it pays the bills. She's okay.
Yeah.
And for myself, I remember when I went into, I remember the last corporate contract I went into, or my last corporate job, there was a contractor that left. And I remember they were unhappy with him. And I came in and I fixed whatever was broken within like a couple of months. And they said, "Oh, I'm so happy that you're here. You know, we're paying this guy way too much money for what he was able to do." And I said, "Okay, curious. How much is this money you're talking about?" This guy was making almost 50 grand more than I was,
Mm-hmm.
and he couldn't deliver. And I said to them, "So you knew coming in that I was severely underpaid, but nobody thought about adjusting it?" And they said, "Well, you're internal. Because you're internal, we can't play with the rate. He's a contractor." So I did not get the rate. And they said, "Well, technically, you know, based on HR, we can only give you this range in terms of a bump." But
Mhm.
I was the only person who fixed the issue. And that became an issue. And that was my first realization that if you don't ask, you won't know. And if you don't know, you can't plan for it to make sure that you get what you quote unquote deserve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
One,
can I go back a little bit, Leanne? So I love Shauna said something that really struck with me that made me think, kind of going back to the beginning, right? So when we think about, self-esteem and self-worth and value, right? Adrian started this talking about, a lot of this goes back to our own individual value, how we see ourselves, right? So basically that's what we're saying. How do we see ourselves and the value that we create at work? But this really does start when we're girls.
Oh, yes.
Right.
yeah.
It starts when we're girls. And Shauna said, this woman didn't have a relationship with money because her father took care of it. And I think it's so interesting when I look at my smaller, younger nieces and nephews, and even myself. Like I remember going through these times from a girl to a teenager to a young adult, trying to really figure out who I was. Right. I could see myself as a granddaughter. I knew what I was as a sister. I knew who I was as a daughter, but those things were always related to my relationship with someone else,
Mm.
but never my relationship with myself.
Wow.
I never. It took me a long time to develop a relationship with Jeannine, and I think a lot of women are so accustomed to being in relationship with other people, and they see their value attached to that relationship. Right, why we spend so much time spiraling when a relationship ends, be it a romantic, intimate relationship or a relationship with one of our friends and our girlfriends, right? Or even a fallout with a family member. Like some guys can be like, well, that relationship's over, I'm out, right? With a friend. But we have a falling out with a friend, and we have such a hard time getting back to ourselves and even reconciling in that relationship because our identity is tied to it. And
Mhm.
so much of our value and our worth.
Yes. Now let me jump in on that one because she brought back a lot of things when you're saying your worth and being tied to money and tied to service to other people. So most times when people say, you know what, you want to be a better version of yourself so
Mhm.
you can be a better mother, be a better wife, be a better boss, be a better employee. And all that does is keep telling us that our worth is tied to our service
Yeah.
of
Mm.
someone else,
Girl.
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So my message is always,
Yeah.
you will always hear me say, you need to be a better version of you for you,
For you.
Mm.
for nobody else. And I love that part that you're saying about a relationship with yourself. By your 20s, most of us think we're supposed to have the world figured out. We're
Where does
supposed
that
to
come
know who
from?
we
I didn't
are.
think that though,
And I
Leanne.
don't know
I
because
wasn't
you're
like
I
that in my
do.
20s.
you're supposed to try new things, figure out who you are, and establish that relationship with your authentic self. So you're not in your 40s trying to relive your 20s,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Because you're just now learning who you are.
Yeah.
I just want to add though. So Jeannine just asked a really pertinent question though. She said, where did it come from? The idea, the comparative idea, right? That we have to achieve it all or figure it all out in our 20s. And out for myself, um, I was categorized or whatever you want to call it, as gifted, right? In the first grade. That's a heavy mantle to wear. But I didn't really understand. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't even understand what that was. But the label carried me all the way through high school. And so people, right, had different expectations of me based on what they knew about me or not. So did I have a high IQ? Yes. But my mom and my dad like didn't expose that to me. So I still don't know what it was to this day, but I was labeled as that. But because of that, I was given different privileges and opportunities, which then carried me to different spaces and rooms. But I was also the only Black person typically in those spaces and rooms. I mean, for like almost my entire, undergraduate, elementary, middle, and high school career, it was me. But of course, I didn't live like that. I lived in a very non-diverse neighborhood, right? Where you were one of many. And so, but my mom was an educator. She was very learned and all these things. My dad worked in construction. So I had a really good balance in the house, but I've always had a competitive edge. And as I got older, though, I, steered it away. So I would compare myself to my peers in terms of where I am now or how I'm trying to achieve. And then attending school at an HBCU, Florida A&M Rattlers, go ahead, go shout out Rattlers. I had a very competitive class. And so I'm in the business school, everybody's competing for this thing and a finite number of roles and jobs and internships. So it's fostered there, right? We're told to go to school, do well, get a good job, move forward, and compete against now other people. So we live in America, especially in a cycle of constant competition. And so if you're not moving forward and propelling yourself forward, then I felt you're falling behind. It was only until I started to carve out my own niche and determine what's going to make me happy, how I wanted to serve myself first, shout out to Leanne, right? And then other people. Because I always feel like I'm a pretty damn good version of myself now. I can always be better, absolutely not perfect. But I feel like I always do the best that I can in the space where I am.
Now, let me ask you this, Adriane. Growing up, being labeled as gifted, having that pressure on you, what did that do for your self esteem? Because it can sometimes go either way. Either it's going to boost your self esteem, or you've got so much pressure that you start second guessing and doubting and having self esteem issues.
Baby, you know me. Listen, I've had this same self-esteem since I was 2, and I'm not kidding. I introduced myself and never had a problem with that. And it was fostered. I wasn't arrogant, or because black girls aren't allowed to be arrogant, right? They're not allowed to be forward. But I have been called in later years aggressive, pushy, sometimes a B word, right? And even in corporate spaces, that became a problem for a white woman that I worked for. She told me, she said, you can come across as the smartest person in the room. And I said, wow, that certainly isn't how I carry myself, because I'm a servant leader. I help to support and lift everyone. So the fact that she said that I knew was her challenge and not mine. So in answer to your question, it helped me to elevate my confidence level, but it was supported by my parents. It was supported by the environments that I was in. Like I had a really healthy childhood. I was pushed and expected to do well, but I was also given those tools, right? So to me, it was a natural progression. It wasn't until I got older that people started to try to knock that down.
Chip it away.
Now let's shift a little bit, because I want to definitely make sure that we're talking about boundaries, because that's my jam. That's where I really want and feel like a lot of us need a lot of work. But before that, let me do my station identification. You are listening to Wake Up Happy Sis on KCCR The Brownstone, where we are changing the narrative for Black and Brown people by telling our stories our way. So just had to get that in real quick.
Love that.
But that's so, as we're thinking about setting boundaries, right? Setting that your own sense of identity and purpose. What would you say, and we're going to start with you, Shauna, what would you say maybe was your kind of defining moment in recognizing who you are and getting that identity and being able to set healthy boundaries and stand in those boundaries.
So I think I mentioned it backstage, but I think when I had my son was the first moment I had those the need to make sure that boundaries were in place. There just wasn't enough of me to go around. And what I found from it, especially I had my son around 19, so I was still trying to figure myself out. So when I had him, I had to sit down and actually think, okay, well, who am I? Because I didn't have enough time to really understand who I was. And it was 4 years into being a mom that I think I've existed so long, just doing all the things, the daycares, the drop-offs, the staying up, the changing everything. And at the same time, I was still trying to finish off school. And I remember thinking, why do I feel so overwhelmed every single day? And I just couldn't feel like I was settled. And I'm a person who like to be grounded. I like to kind of keep things at a certain pace where I have a bit more control. I like to forward think, a couple of years, days, months out. And when I realized that I was doing all of that, but I wasn't able to do it in a way that had me in it. I had to, make sure he was in school, make sure this was going on, make sure I finished this, check in on the family. I had everybody else but me. So the moment I realized that that was happening a lot for me was he was around 4 or 5, and I remember sitting in the car and thinking, I can't do this. I can't go to work, come home. It felt like a cycle, and then I decided, you know what? Tomorrow I'm calling in sick, and I'm going to check myself into a hotel. And I did. I checked myself into a hotel. I stayed there. I called his dad and I said, pick him up. I'm not gonna do this. I'm gonna stay overnight and I'm just gonna sit with myself. And I sat with myself that whole night. I think I had a couple of good cries. I had a couple couple of moments where I wrote everything down. And the question that kept coming up, well, who am I? What do I want? Do I still want the same things? And I realized I didn't even want the same things.
Mm.
I was trying to go after being an accountant. My mom was very happy with being an accountant. At least it was a profession. Um, and I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it. And I realized I was studying to do it. I wasn't connected to it. I had other aspirations I wasn't tapping into. I didn't even read. I was writing poetry. I never went back to it. I was doing anything creative. Everything was tapped out. So that day in the hotel, I actually sat down and I wrote everything current state and I did a future state. And that was the moment it highlighted to me that I wasn't in the right direction and there was no way I could continue. And that was the first time I realized that I had to really take a step back and just do me. And even though, I had a lot of friction with my in-law at the time because she's old school. She was like, you shouldn't be working. You should take care of the baby. You should not. He should be home with you. That's why he's sick. And we had so much friction. And I remember saying to her, "That's not what I want. So it's either you're going to support me or you're going to leave."
That's right.
And that was the first time I ever put a boundary in. And I remember she was not very happy with it. But to this very day, I think she respects me about that because I've never faltered on it. I said, it's either you're going to support it or you're going to leave me alone. And we decided to go with the support. So we were good.
And what about you, Adriane?
Boundaries are interesting for me. Uh, I don't typically have an issue with exerting or sharing, or even establishing them, right? I have a heavy timbre in my voice, a deeper timbre rather. So for some people, it's an intimidation factor. And I'm keenly aware that as a Black woman with a deep voice, in some spaces, this is boundary enough. And I have learned to throttle forward or ease back and smile and deliver in a different tone depending on the situation. But that's learned behavior for me because, again, being sort of raised in a spirit of service, feeling like you always have to be the cleanup person or to do the thing and then go in and do that, it was difficult. I say very quickly, I remember working at a company and wanting to do really well. Had gotten my job. I was making, making my money, not quite six figures, but I was so happy. I was single, had my little car, all those things that I had just created this existence. And I was working, I would get to work about, 9 or so and work into the evening, 7, 8 o'clock at night, depending on what I was working on. So for me, that was, I was exerting and showing my value foolishly, right? We do that. But I was there, I would often be there by myself. And so, so much so that one of the gentlemen that worked, I was here in Georgia, but he worked in Canada. He said, "Well, we've got a question that's late. Who's going to be there? Oh, we know Adriane's going to be there. She's always there." Like that was a joke on the team because they knew they could always count on me, right? And then I learned quickly, like this isn't serving me. And then I got laid off. Now the two aren't comparable, right? It's economic downturn. It was in, manufacturing industry, but we have to exert boundaries because when things happen and we get laid off or something happens and you lose your job, then you have all of your self-esteem tied into this role in this job. When they aren't combined, they aren't conjoined. You're supposed to do good work because you want to. I needed to exert boundaries and I didn't. I've learned that though. Here's when I work. I give you my all when I'm doing it. Full-time contract, whatever the case may be. And I have learned also, and Shauna mentioned when she had her son, I learned a little bit before that because I was having the challenges that I shared, at my former corporate role. And my husband wrote on this whiteboard that's on my refrigerator right now, it's just a job. You can get another one. And so from that point on, I really started to plant my flag in the ground and continue to exert those boundaries for my peace of mind.
Yeah. Y'all, that was so good. So am I next, Leanne?
You are.
I'm just gonna jump on in. What happened with me is I think I had to get in touch with like all the different personas that I was trying to operate in and other women operate in, right? So we have songs about us being a superwoman and an independent woman, and some of us are perfectionists and all of these things. And what I recognized for me was I took on the persona of the savior. Now, before I identified it and it was brought to my attention, I would have denied it. Like, only one savior, that's Jesus Christ. Right? I would have pretended that was not me. But oh yeah, I was a savior. I was the one motivating, picking people up, making decisions for others, and doing all the things. And when I think about setting healthy boundaries, the first boundary we have to set is around our own selves and our behaviors, right? We be again outward looking like they're not going to be using me, and we're trying to set boundaries around other people, but it's us. And so I had this savior persona, and the savior knows more. They know better. They know the right ways to do things. They know the best way to do decisions. They know all the stuff for everybody else's life. And so once I recognized that, and it was a man, I was taking this class and we were moving my mom, and I was just so frustrated with her because I had ordered the truck. I had made all the plans, had the schedule together, what time we were moving. I had coordinated for my brother, my niece, all the things, right? I had a perfect day planned and nothing was working. I get in town, my mother ain't packed nothing. She said she'd been packing. She ain't really packed nothing. The garage is full of stuff, the basement, just stuff everywhere, all over the place. And I'm on the phone venting. And the guy said to me, he said, and he was so compassionate with me. He said, "Well, did anybody ask you to do that?" And I said, "But she's moving and we only got like 3.5 days and we're going to be in town." And he was like, no, Jeannine. Did anybody ask you? Did your mom ask you to do any of those things? And he was so right. She did. I had expectations of her and everybody else because I jumped in to save the day.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, that's my biggest realization. And I have to remind myself of that often. God did not put me here to solve everybody else's problems. He did
Amen.
not put me here to pretend or be the person to fix everybody else's things. And what I found out, the person that was most frustrated was me, right? I was frustrated because they didn't appreciate it. I was frustrated because I felt, like they were wasting my time. I was the one upset.
Ooh, you
And I was
preaching, sis.
right. And I was actually upsetting other people, right? Because I was being disruptive and acting like I knew what was best. And I really didn't. So for me, Leanne, that's my thing. I had to recognize the personas that I was walking in. And did nobody crown me the savior? um, but me. And I was the only person that was really the most unhappy in that role.
I
Yes.
feel a little bit of attacked, but I'm gonna put my head down.
Right. No, she totally got me triggered over here because you were the savior. I was is, am
I was like, was?
the cleanup
Current state.
woman. Okay.
Oh, so you the janitor.
I've
You the
always been
janitor.
the cleanup woman, right? Come in and save the day. Come in and fix what everybody else done
Indeed.
messed up. Leanne will be available. She don't sleep. She
Oof.
don't sleep. I had a client last night message me, and so I'm in the IT space. That has been my major world for most of my life, right? Which is definitely not a black female space,
Uh-uh.
right? So I've always been the cleanup person. Client called me last night. I think my site's under attack.
Fix it.
It's 9:30 at
Mm.
night.
Are you on call?
I, I it took me 20 minutes to message him back, but I messaged back. It's 9:30. I'm in bed, and I will address it tomorrow.
Mhm.
Mm.
But before I would have never done that, right? I would have been like, oh, let me get up, stop everything that I'm doing because I'm used to being the cleanup person, which goes
Mhm.
to my self esteem, which goes to my identity, which goes to my confidence, right? Because I've
Mhm.
always felt like I had to be better than anybody else in the room to prove
Mhm.
my worth. I mean, when I worked in corporate America, I worked at AT&T and I had locks down in my butt. Okay. So I'm this earthy black girl, and they had started a new team. So I've written all the documentation for this team. I wrote the training plans. I trained all the people. And my manager gave me a performance review that was 3 months late, by the way. We ain't even talk about that.
Mm.
But he rated me a 2 out of 5. A 2 out of 5. And the first thing I did was go into that little space of I must not be good enough. And I did miss a thing or two here or there, but I had to ask somebody else that I had just trained to be a manager. I ain't even a manager. I'm training the people who are coming in to manage. Is this me? I need you to read this and tell me independently. She was like, this is not you. They're trying to get rid of you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? She said, because they had this, we're getting rid of low performers.
Mm-hmm. It's an excuse.
It's
Yeah.
an excuse. But I had to muster up my own confidence and look them in the face, look my manager in the face, and let him know it wasn't going to happen like that. You know, in the end, I ended up going to get a job that was paying me 15,000 more, and they was left to clean up the mess because who wasn't there anymore? The cleanup crew.
But so often we're in that space that you just described, because I've been there too. And you think you're the only person that it's happening to because we don't talk, we won't tell anybody else. So we're in that space, we feel attacked, we're under attack every day, self-esteem being hit. And you went immediately to a space of you're not good enough when in fact you were overperforming. And I
Yeah.
had done the same thing. And I remember talking to the gentleman who was the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the company where I was. And he told me in confidence, Adriane, there is an undercurrent, a systemic campaign to get rid of Black women on PIPs, on performance improvement programs. He said that's how they're doing it. Like it is a campaign, unspoken, but it's happening because more than me as a person, as an employee, was coming to his office and explaining what was happening, and he was sitting there outdone. He wound up leaving that role, but to know that this is yet another way that we are targeted to be removed from companies, right? So in opposition to that, I say we have to own our careers, we have to own our self-esteem, and we have to know that you got this job, sis, you can get another one.
Yeah.
We can get enough,
Yeah.
and there are more.
And
Yeah.
I agree with that. My experience has always been the cleanup person. So I could go in and I can see what's broken that they claim is so complex, and then I'll go in and say, okay, well, this is a problem. So let's go to here, do this, and I'll structure it out. And then at the end, what would happen is they'll plug their own people in. They'll kind of move me out and then say, okay, that's great. Now we got it working. Okay, let's move on. So Shauna, you go here. And then I move on to something else. So I would always get kind of shifted, and then next thing I know, the email comes out. We did a fantastic job. We were able to do X, Y, and Z, and no mention,
Nowhere to be found.
nowhere to be found. And then I'll move to something else, and then I'll get pigeonholed into specific areas. And I remember sitting back once, and I went into my director's office and I said, this is bullshit, right? And he's like, you're really good at what you do, but I really have a hard time with you, playing nice in the fan. I said, really? And he's like, yes, I really have a hard time with that. And I said, okay, what about that? And he's like, you're too honest. What? So I said, I'm not following. And he's like, you're too honest. You need to work on saying things without saying things. That's why you're really good at what you do, because you can figure out and then you can hold people accountable. And then, but after that, we need to take over. And I said, okay, so you're saying that there's a gap, but you're saying that there's still good performance, but there's still a gap. So help me understand, because help me make it make sense. So at the end, he ended up, it was because I refused to do some of the unethical things that he was willing to do. Some of my values did not align with them. So I refused to do some of the unethical things. So when it came to cleaning people up, I wasn't down for it. I'm able to do a workforce plan. I'm able to do all these things, put things in place, and identify kind of the heat maps of people who might need some retooling. But at the end of the day, I think you should do things ethically and make sure that you keep fairness at the front. For them, it's not always fair. So when you think about kind of the culture, I wasn't a good fit. But my values were tied to, or my identity was tied to, well, why can't I be part of the accolades of these things? I did the grunt work. They were stuck for how long, costing how much money, and I fixed it. And then you moved me to the next problem, and then the next problem, and then the next problem. So I'm not like the underdog clearing up the gunk, and then everybody else rises to the top. So I don't understand. And then he said, well, you just need to clean up your communication. And I said, okay. So I said, okay, I'm going to enroll in communication courses. So I did. Then he couldn't respond. Then it was like, okay, we're just moving in a different direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always something.
You
That's
know, Leanne, one of the things I find interesting about women and Black women and women of color in this conversation, simply because we're going back into the workplace. And I think Shauna, you and Adriane, and I know I've been in this situation, is so important is that so many of us are the first and only in a lot of different ways, right? So you might be the first one in your family to go to college and get a corporate job and to move into a leadership role, or be the first one in your family to make six figures very young. Because I know I was the first, like when I realized how much money my mother made compared to how much I was making at 27, I kept saying, how you raise us? How do we wear clothes every day and eat, right? Because I'm over here struggling to pay for my bills for just myself. And I think the pressure of this first and only ties back into this, how it chips away sometimes at your self-esteem, because you're often in spaces and places where you're undergoing some microaggressions, or you don't necessarily know how to navigate it. You don't have the necessary support system to be as successful as you imagine yourself to be, or because you're first and only, you also feel like I have to do more. You overcompensate for that. You're either giving more to other people financially, or you're exerting more energy and time, helping people solve their problems, or, so there's all of this that goes along, I think, with that for women that we're carrying. Like, it looks great to be the first Black woman the first woman who's done these things. But the pressure of all of that, right? Because a lot of times we're in these roles and we were like still trying to figure it out. Right? We're still trying to learn it, figure out who the players are, identify who we want to be in those roles, how we want to show up, how we want to communicate, how we want to lead, how we want to give feedback. All the list goes on and on. And then we don't always have safe spaces to go back to talk, right? So this is why I think all of us will say why coaching and therapy is such a huge component of growth and development, because sometimes you don't even, like, for me, I had a season where I had a significant amount of family loss, right? My grandmother, my mom passed it shortly after her, completely unexpected. I thought I would have my mother for another 20, 25 years. And then, work. And I didn't want to spend my time with my friends talking about my problems, talking about my grief and the sadness. I wanted to be able to be happy with them and laugh with them, but also tell them what I needed from them for support. But oftentimes the weight of all of that, right? And I have a lot of girlfriends who've been the first one to be a partner, a lot of these things. And sometimes we just want to have fun together, but we don't have a safe space. And so, that's why I think the resources needed to continue to ensure your self-esteem is strong, and that you're creating healthy boundaries first for yourself so that you can communicate what you need to other people. Because that's where the boundaries with others start, is like communicating, telling people what you need from them, telling people what you need them to stop doing and to start doing, right? It's like that whole model, that stop, start, continue. Keep doing this, stop doing that, and let's start doing these things. And I think if we can get those sort of model that for ourselves, that some of that pressure that we feel to take on these personas, we can let some of that go. And I'm gonna say this one last thing. I'm glad I grew up and became of age in the 20th century and not the 21st century, because I see with the young women in my life, the 20-some-year-olds, early 30s, that they have all this comparison, because they're not just comparing themselves to the people they went to college with and their friends and what that path was. Like I said, when Adriane was talking, like, I didn't feel this pressure to be all of these things in my 20s. I was very clear that I was still learning. My family was supportive around that. Like, go out there, explore the world, right? You can do this differently. Now they got this thing right here telling them that they should own a home. They should have a
by
Tesla.
15.
Yeah, they should be investing in property. I had one young lady, she had just started a new job, and she was texting me like, Auntie Jeannine, I got to figure out my multiple streams of income. I said, girl, you need to learn the job you in.
Right.
You need to learn this job. Master a few things on this job. Get your promotion, get your bonuses, and then let's talk about it. I said, get some passive income. Start investing in the stock market. Get you a wealth manager or something. I said, but you don't need to be selling, making, baking, nothing while you're learning this thing. And so I think we have too much pressure on, and then it's the people who are giving us the pressure ain't even doing all the things.
No,
they're not doing it.
No,
So,
let me address that real quick. I just want to say one thing, because I knew you've been itching to get in, Adriane. I saw you over there. But I think especially now for young women, when you look at, we've got the Instagram influencers, all these 18, 19-year-old millionaires, okay, right? It puts so much pressure on them to be everything at such an early age. And you haven't even figured out who you are yet, right? They don't even have the luxury of making a mistake, because now all your mistakes are on the internet, right? So I agree with you, Jeannine. I'm so happy that I grew up, when I grew up, before we had all of our business on the internet every day, all day on Front Street. And we now have to not just compare ourselves to our friends, but to all the other people who are seemingly doing way better than us at this time in our life. So go ahead.
Oh my gosh. Can I just say one thing? You talk about just social media, which is insane and just hyper Oh, we're hyper aware of everything and everybody from here to the Ukraine to Indonesia to all over the world. So not only are you comparing yourself to your friends, to everybody in your, phone, Instagram, influencers, and somebody in a hut in Kazakhstan. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so we have all of these influences, but I'm just gonna say this without dating myself. Friend, I came to Atlanta for Freaknik. That's all I'm gonna say. And some of the judges and politicians, and I'm being very literal, attorneys, very well respected attorneys that I know would not have these roles if social media were around back in the day. That's all I'm
Right.
gonna say.
You better tell it. Sitting, and I'll just tell them, me either. Companies will not be trusting me if they saw me sitting on top of that car.
Listen, and I went to school in Florida, so not only was there Freaknik, there was Daytona Black Beach Weekend, all the things. I
All
was a
the
good girl.
things, right?
I was a
So
good
I
girl.
love the
I'm just
fact that
saying.
we were free to be youthful, but you're right. I see all these things now, but I also at the same time, I'll tell you this. I do, and Shauna, you might see this with the work that you do with your corporate clients and your clients. I do appreciate young people for being aware that their mental health is important, right?
Yeah.
So we think about setting healthy boundaries and self-esteem, and not to derail this conversation, but I see them setting a lot more boundaries, right? Some of them I think are ridiculous, like don't call me without texting me, but that's your work phone. So, but anyway, I digress. But I do like that, right? I do like the fact that some of them will say, you know what, I'm going to communicate to my leaders that I'm done on Friday at 5 o'clock and I'll see you on Monday.
That's right.
That,
And
I
saying it.
do. I appreciate that quite a bit. That they're willing to say, I come first, to the point of like, I love my job, I like what I'm doing, but I'm not living to work. I'm working to live. And I think that is a huge shift in the culture that I applaud every day.
Well, they're
Yeah.
not afraid. They're not afraid to move forward. I just want to add one thing, and then I'll stop talking. But Jeannine mentioned therapy and coaching, right? And so we all on this call are coaches in some way, in some right, with our audiences, with people that we interact with. But I would just like to add, for those folks who are either challenged with establishing boundaries, period, let alone healthy or not. But if you're challenged with establishing boundaries, then it is absolutely okay to enlist the support and help of a therapist, right? And with a coach, an executive coach or leadership coach, like part of the role is to help you to craft and create what those boundaries should be, and then train you how to walk into that. Right. So for my clients, we talk about the challenges that they've had prior and where they want to go. So there's a gap there, right? There's a gap where they currently are typically and where they'd like to go. And typically that's around some work that we have to do or some steps or some training that we have to employ. But it is absolutely okay and great to establish boundaries with the help of a therapist and or an executive leadership performance coach, fill in the blank coach.
And that's a great segue. So get out of my head because that's where we were going next. Is I really want to give people some tips and strategies that they can incorporate into their life, and understanding that change is not a today, tomorrow thing, right? Change takes time. Growth is sometimes painful, it's sometimes ugly, but it's necessary if you want to transform your life from where you are to where you know you can be. So, if you have one or two little tips or strategies that you would leave with your younger self, right, around confidence, identity, setting boundaries, what would that be? So,
Can I
Shauna.
go first?
Oh yeah.
Oh, Shauna, go ahead,
No,
Shauna.
no,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Shauna.
No,
Shauna
no,
had chocolate.
oh,
Go ahead,
no.
Shauna.
No, so I'll answer that question, but I wanted to share because I think Jeannine, you had brought up like just kind of the boundary set in the workplace. What I've noticed is the DEI piece where there's now that injection of DEI promotion, and then because of that, I get a lot of people who feel lost in the role because they don't have those supports. And because of that, they're set up for success, because the measure of success is not attainable because they don't have the support. So that was the piece that I wanted to share. And in terms of the boundaries around that, so one of the challenges that I see when I'm working with a lot of people is the fear that comes up with setting boundaries. A lot of that is centered around the fear of losing relationships, or the fear of guilt around making the wrong decisions, or the identity piece. Am I going to lose everything as a result of this decision? And one of the things that I always go back and center around is the boundary is never about the other person. It's
Yeah.
always about you. It's like creating a fence around you to say, this is what makes me whole. And I want you to understand what makes me whole so I can be the best performer in the role so that we can work around that. And I think when we're getting into leadership, a lot of, even though the Gen Z might say, "Oh, don't call me before you text me," what I always say, my rebuttal to that is push back if you're in the leadership role and say, "Understood. Let's set some expectation as a team as to how we communicate." Because the boundary as a team needs to be in place, and the boundary as a leader and as an individual has to be in place as well. So let's make sure it's all aligned. Because if I need you because there's an SOS, I'm not going to text you. That's just part of the policy. We're not gonna test you. We're not gonna text you as a result of that. However, I will respect your boundaries for everything else. So let's have that communication. So um, the tip I would leave is, in order to understand, in order to set good boundaries, you do have to empathize enough to really understand kind of what the fear is around those boundaries for people, and then be clear on kind of how to communicate that so you can deliver those boundary expectations, and then you can enforce it if you need to.
I love that. Jeannine.
So I think for me if I were to go back to my younger self, I would tell her, "Girl, you doing all right. Like just be here, be present." But I think to maintain that was to not to continue to be consistent with my anchoring routine for my life, right? So whatever that is, it has evolved and has changed. But if it's, waking up in the morning, exercising, and having a stack of routines, right? Exercising, praying, journaling, meditating, reading, those sorts of things. Because I recognize that when I don't do that, and I'm typically pretty good at it, but when I don't do that, everything is off. And then as I've aged, what I've realized that when I don't root myself in my anchoring exercises, I don't have boundaries. I do feel horrible about myself, right? I look in the mirror and I'm constantly complaining about, my face is breaking out or my belly is sticking out, those things. And I find that when I'm anchored and rooted in things that make me feel powerful and strong emotionally, spiritually, right? Not just physically, but when I have those stacked activities, especially if I can start them at the top of my day when I wake up, I feel better. I think clearer. I'm happier. And I realize that as I've aged, I'm more in tune with what's going on with me, right? So if you are a woman who is starting to be premenopausal, or you may be in menopause, like I remember when I first started, I didn't even realize how my mood was changing. I had no idea what was going on with me, but I knew that something was weird because I don't get upset easily. I don't pop off at people, like, and I was doing it, and I was like, what the hell is wrong with me? And two things were wrong. One, I wasn't anchored. I wasn't following through my routine. So I was all over the place, and I wasn't in tune with my body. So because I wasn't in tune with my body, all of these other things were happening. I couldn't talk to my doctor about what was going on with me because I was blaming other people. So I think, I would tell the younger Jeannine to stay in touch with your body, stay connected to yourself spiritually. And you do that by consistently anchoring yourself in healthy routines that make you feel good, make you think better, and are more productive. and it helps with my confidence.
Yes, I love that. Yes, to all of that. Adrian, what about you?
Oof. Um, I would tell the younger Adrian, I would tell my younger self to really um, figure out what you want to do or try, and then do it. Try it. It is okay to veer off the path, right? The path that our leaders set, the path that our parents set, the path that even when I was in college, that my advisors set.
Can I do this? Is this this sound like poetry to me?
Listen, I remember being at, a top business school and deciding early on that I didn't like it. I didn't want to be there. I actually hated it. And I remember mentioning to my mom and my advisor that I wanted to leave. It was a coveted spot. And both of them were like, nope, you're going to stick it out. So guess what? I didn't do well. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
Right. I eventually did okay, and then graduated and got to grad school and excelled because I had niched down, was focusing on what I wanted. But I remember expressing like, I don't really like this and I want to do something else, and actually had found something else. And they were like, no, that's not why you're there. Do this thing. And so I reacted in a way that stymied my professional growth, my personal growth, because I'm gonna get back at y'all by doing this thing. And it was hurting me. They didn't care. I mean, they cared, but it didn't have any impact on them. And that's what we do, right? We do things to self-sabotage. We do things that impact us, and the other person or entity or company or corporation is left like, okay, now what? Right? We do things that impact ourselves and put us on a different path. But I would tell the younger Adrian to figure it out, but figure it out by doing. And if it doesn't feel good to you, do something else. And it's okay to try it and figure it out and continue to go and grow and learn.
Amen. Well, we are almost at the hour, you guys. It has been a great conversation. I am so happy that you guys came and shared a little time, a little space with me and my audience here. And as we wrap up, let the people know how they can find you, how they can connect with you, and how they can support you. We're going to start a little different. Jeannine.
Hey, well, Leanne, thank you again for having me. It's been a joy being here with Shauna and Adrian and you. You all can connect with me real easy at JeannineBrown.com. That's JeAnnine Brown.com.
Yeah, spell it one more time.
JeAnnine Brown.com.
Yeah. All right. Make sure that you connect with Jeannine. She's got a book. She didn't say anything about the book.
I sure did.
She got a whole book out there. Like I'm gonna need you to put that book
Here we
out there.
go. You can connect with me at JeannineBrown.com, or you can get my book at UnstuckandUnstoppablebook.com. So the book is Unstuck and Unstoppable. It has 5 amazing strategies. No matter if you're a business owner or a career professional, this book is for you.
All right. Adrian.
Hey, again, I'll echo Jeannine and just thank you so much. I've so enjoyed the conversation with you and Shauna and Jeannine today. Y'all can find me at the LinkedIn Pros on social media and www.thelinkedinpros.com.
All right. And Shauna.
Yes. So same, I'm going to say, echo the same sentiments. It was such a great conversation and meeting all of you guys, ladies. So in order to reach me, I'm at www.concaved.com. So that's spelled with a K, KONCAVED.com.
Hold on, you can have a second. See, I'm trying to do too many things at once because I'm supposed to have these.
See, that set your boundaries for multitasking, friend.
Look, no, look, my stuff go show up. If you want to reach
Love
Shauna,
it.
head on over. Make sure that you guys connect with these awesome and powerful Black women who are going to help you level up in your career, in your business. They're going to help you go to that next level. And part of that is understanding your worth, standing in that and being your true authentic self and setting those boundaries first with yourself and then with everybody else. So I want to thank y'all for coming. And because I love y'all, I got a healthy boundaries worksheet for you so that you can figure out what are some of those boundaries you need to set and how you can start digging into that. Okay. So head on over to bit.ly health/healthy boundaries worksheet and you can get that worksheet. So I want to thank y'all for coming. Again, you're watching Wake Up Happy Sis on KCCR The Brownstone, and y'all have a wonderful and blessed day.